At 6:00 a.m., I stepped down the back path with coffee in one hand and a socket set in the other. And the first thing I saw was steel-thick industrial chain wrapped around my dock posts and a fat padlock stamped Maple Harbor HOA bright yellow against the lake haze. A laminated notice was zip-tied to the metal like a ransom letter, demanding $300 a year for lake access on water. I legally own, with a cute little signature line under the name of the HOA president. I didn't cut those chains to make a point. I cut them because theft dressed up as community equity is still theft. People imagine lake life as sunsets and lazy Saturdays, and sure we have those, but what we really paid for was peace and the right to launch our little aluminum boat at dawn without asking permission. My name is Caleb. I design marine systems for a living, which basically means I solve stubborn problems with torque and patience. My wife Jenna is a local reporter with a spine of steel and a notebook that never leaves her bag. And our daughter Ellie is 11, gap-toothed, and still proud of the first bluegill she pulled up off that dock. Last June, the photo lives on our fridge between a spelling test and a grocery list. You know what I mean. We didn't buy access. We bought ownership, old-school riparian rights tied to this parcel, since before Maple Harbor Estates had a sign. The clause is right there, in the deed highlighted. Dated 1986, the kind of thing you point to and say, that is the reason we paid extra. For 16 months, it was perfect coffee steam, rising over Lake Briar boat carb. Clean kid laughter bouncing off the water. And then, one Thursday afternoon, the doorbell rang and brought a smile. I didn't trust Caleb. I'm Lorraine Caldwell, HOA president. Some families feel excluded from the waterfront experience, she said, breezing past the threshold like she had a key clipboard tucked against a blazer that matched the HOA letterhead. I kept one hand on the door, not rude, just anchored. We paid for exclusive dock rights, Lorraine. They're grandfathered into the deed, I said, even and calm. Because my dad taught me early that the first person who raises their voice loses the argument. Lorraine nodded with that soft empathy you offer a child right before you say no. No one's questioning ownership. We're just exploring equitable usage, maybe a rotating schedule, or a modest community contribution toward maintenance. Win-win. And she smiled in a way that felt like a policy had already been written, and she was just testing how hard it would be to sell it. Jenna came in from the kitchen with coffee for everyone, and the eyes she saves for budget hearings and school board meetings, the ones that say it twice so I can quote you later. And I repeated myself. No, thank you. Lorraine's smile never reached her eyes, but that parting line did. We'll find a solution that works for everyone, one way or another. Friday. Ordinary Saturday. Ordinary Sunday. Soccer practice, and a stubborn impeller then. Monday dawned soft and gold mist, thin as gauze on the water, and those chains gleamed like a dare. The notice screamed in bold. Annual lake access fee. $300 payment due in 14 days. Grandfathered rights revoked under community equity standards. Signed Maple Harbor Estates, HOA President Lorraine Caldwell. I took photos like a crime scene tech, wide, tight serial numbers on the padlock angles to capture property lines and shoreline markers. Then I emailed everything to myself, to Jenna, to a cloud folder labeled Doc, and I walked up the hill to Lorraine's porch, where she sat with a white mug and a tone like morning announcements. Good morning, Caleb. I see you found our notice. You chained my dock, I said it steady. You're claiming the power to revoke rights you don't have. She exhaled through her smile. slow, patient, practiced, exclusive. Access creates community discord. The board voted unanimously, and when I said, "You can't vote away," recorded deed language, she didn't blink. 14 days to comply. After that, enforcement becomes comprehensive code compliance assessments. There are plenty of options, and she gave me that neighborly shrug that isn't neighborly at all. "Is that a threat?" I asked, and she kept smiling for whoever might be listening across the street. Actions have results. Choose wisely. I don't deliver speeches when adrenaline hits. I walked home, set my coffee on the workbench, pulled my angle grinder off the pegboard, and took a personal day without asking anyone's permission. Ellie caught the bus without seeing the ear protection in my pocket. 7:30s, I stood at my dock with 4 feet of power tool and 15 years of knowing exactly how long steel pretends to be. Strong sparks smoke a clean cut, then another, and 12 minutes later, those chains were coiled in my garage like trophies from a hunt. I never wanted. Cutting wasn't the victory replacing was. I measured twice and mounted a low-profile steel gate marine. Rated hardware, smart lock synced to my phone, tucked motion cameras into housings that pass for cleats. Posted the sign, "The state requires every bolt on my property line." Every angle recorded. Not to show off, to make it clear that access would be legal or it would be nothing. Then I sat at the kitchen table and built my paper armor deed pages, survey maps, and Maple Harbor covenants laid out like cards. And there it was in black and white. Nothing in the HOA documents touches waterfront rights. No authority over docks. Nothing over riparian privileges, so I tabbed the pages, printed 3 clean copies, and called a property attorney named Marcus Hale, who speaks in sentences that land. He listened, asked 2 questions, and said what I needed to hear. "You have ironclad riparian rights document. Everything record calls. If they try to weaponize code enforcement, we call that harassment. You do not raise your voice. You let the paperwork do the yelling." The next morning, the softer punch landed April Bennett, who bakes lemon bars that could fix a broken heart, walked her grandkids down the public path, and waved like always. Then she headed for my new gate, because Lorraine had told people the water was now in some fuzzy way open to them. My phone pinged with a motion alert. I met her there, friendly, firm. "Oh, honey, we were just going to see the fish," she said, embarrassment already climbing her cheeks. "April, this is private property. If anyone said otherwise, they were wrong," I said at it gentle because none of this was her fault. She apologized to me like she'd done something wrong, and the kids looked disappointed, and I stood there mad at the person who staged that scene for points. By late afternoon, knocks 3 of them in separate hours. 3 neighbors in various shades of upset. 3 HOA invoices that all read the same: annual lake access maintenance, $300 due upon receipt. Late fees already posted a line that suggested auto draft. "If you didn't respond, Dan." Mercer slapped his envelope on my table. "She told me you funded community access." "Then this shows up," he said, jaw tight. And Nina Price, the accountant on our block, held hers like a subpoena. They backdated penalties for months. We never agreed to. That's not an oops. That's a tactic. And April came back with her own notice and tears of anger. Lorraine said, "It was only for HOA events, a picnic or 2. We never would have signed up for fees." And that's when I pulled out my phone and showed them what I'd photographed. A petition. Lorraine had floated around labeled Lake Access Equity. Vague language about community, spirit, and exploration. No fee amounts. No adoption process. Just a feel-good title with a block of signatures. Same pen, same ink. Pressure, all gathered at one meeting. It looked like consent. But it wasn't. That night, the HOA stuffed mailboxes with glossy flyers. Emergency community meeting Friday 7 p.m. to resolve conflicts between individual property claims and collective benefits. The framing was clean, cast me as selfish without using the word cast Lorraine as a reasonable mediator. Wrap it all in equity. Jenna read it once and reached for a red pen. She underlined phrases like a teacher grading a bad essay, loaded language, false equivalence, manufactured mandate, she said, and then she asked what I planned to do, and I said, let the paperwork do the yelling. So Thursday turned into prep. I clipped a 15-second audio from a call where Lorraine, calm as a yoga app, suggested we modify the fee structure to something more manageable. Say $100 annually, weekends only, which is still an admission. She believed she could charge me to use what I own. I printed a simple one-pager for neighbors, like April left column. What you were told, right column. What you were billed, footer. The covenant page that says waterfront is outside HOA authority. I packed a projector adapter because every HOA room in America uses a cable that belongs in a museum, and I practiced 4 simple lines in the mirror. No heat, no drama, just facts. Friday. The multi-purpose room was already full by 10 to 7. Folding chairs, toddlers with cracker crumbs on their shirts, a coffee urn that tasted scorched, and a banner that said, Maple Harbor Cares. Lorraine stepped up in a navy blazer with a slide deck titled Equity Safety Community. Her voice came out warm, polished, reassuring, and 3 minutes in April lifted her invoice with a hand that shook and asked the kind of question that rebalances a room. Why did you bill me for something you told me would be free during HOA events, and the volume didn't spike? It dropped because people leaned forward for truth. Dan held up his paper. Why does signing a vague petition equal recurring fees with late penalties? And you could feel the shift, not a riot, just doubt hardening into attention. I didn't grandstand. I walked to the table, laid my deed copy down with the grandfathered clause highlighted, and the page tab peeking out. And I spoke into the mic like I was explaining torque specs to a new tech. Here is what I own. Here is what the HOA cannot do. Here is what some of you were billed here, is what you were told. And then I pressed play on 15 seconds of Lorraine offering to reduce a fee. She had no power to impose. The room didn't gasp. No one needed to silence, says Moore. Nina stood and pointed to a tight little table of numbers on the invoices. You can't backdate penalties for agreements that never existed. Who authorized these mailings? Where is the amendment? Where is the vote? And the treasurer? A quiet man named Alan Ruiz shifted, like his chair had grown nails. We never adopted an amendment on lake access, he said, eyed small. And Lorraine rushed in with a word like conceptually, which in HOA land usually means we talked about it. And then someone decided it was real. That's when a neighbor I barely know, a guy named Howard, who fixes his own roof and doesn't waste air, stood up and spoke in the kind of calm that wins courts. Motion to suspend President Caldwell, pending an independent audit to void all lake access invoices and to retain outside counsel. And he sat down like he'd just asked for more creamer. The seconds came from every direction. The interim chair looked stunned. Then professional, then Alan counted hands because that was his job. And when he said majority, Lorraine slapped her binder shut and pointed a finger at me like a weapon. You are poisoning this neighborhood. Caleb, your exclusivity is destroying property values. And I did what Marcus told me, kept my voice low enough to force people to lean in. Please record that outburst in the minutes, and note. Exhibit C. The photos of the chains and the notice, and the chairs nodded. Motion passes, effective immediately. Ms. Caldwell, please surrender the keys, the checkbook, and the administrative logins. And the room did the quiet thing again. The kind that feels like air pressure changing before a storm. Lorraine laughed short and sharp, looked around for a friendly face. Didn't find one, and Alan stepped forward like he was returning a library book and held out his hand. There was a second where pride tried to stand its ground. Then we all heard it. The sound that lives rent-free in my head, metal on metal, keys dropping into a palm, 1, 2, 3, final. And I swear it sounded like a gavel. You'd think I floated home hero music credits, but real life has less polish. I tucked Ellie in, kissed Jenna's forehead, and sat at the table labeling folders with dates, because I knew the audit would need clean lines. I uploaded the audio and video to a drive with a boring file name. I texted Marcus the vote count and went to bed with my jaw still tight. The next day, Lake Briar put on her Sunday best. Like nothing had happened. The phone buzzed a dozen times with motion alerts and texts, and a few apologies that mattered more than they should have. And late afternoon, Lorraine stepped to my property line with 2 people who looked like they regretted volunteering. She used a phrase I'd heard in 1,000 school board meetings, determined community action. And I held up my phone and showed her the camera feeds rolling live from 3 angles. You're on private property. Ms. Caldwell, this interaction is being recorded in high definition. Please leave no menace, no heat. Just the kind of sentence that stands up in court. She squared her shoulders like a speech was loading. Then one supporter tugged her sleeve, and they backed away. Not because they agreed, but because even bullies respect evidence when it's pointed at them. Maybe this is where I should fade the lights and say, happily ever after. But endings don't come pre-packaged. The board hired an outside auditor. Letters went out, voiding invoices. Neighbors who had signed the equity petition knocked on my door to apologize for believing the pitch. And I said, the thing. I believe most people are decent, and decent people can be misled by a confident voice. I don't hate anyone for wanting the water. I hate the lie that told them they could vote away my deed. A week later, Jenna placed a sandwich on the counter and said something that lodged in my chest. You can keep that dock locked forever, and you'll be right. Or you can design something that protects your rights and still gives the street a chance to heal. And I didn't answer because the bruise wasn't gone yet, but that night, I sat on the dock with the app open, watching the access log tick and the lake go dark, thinking about the difference between being correct and being whole. Here's where I might lose a few of you. That happened. I drafted a voluntary program on my terms with a lawyer's eyes on every comma. No mandates, no backdating, no cute language. Strict hours that keep our mornings private. Afternoon windows. We almost never use access controlled by codes that get pulled the moment someone breaks a rule. Money transparent. Quarterly reports, a 3-person rotating committee, so no one becomes a mini monarch. And if 5 families sign up, fine. If none do, also fine. My security stays. My deed stays. My peace stays. I'm not giving an inch on that. I told the interim board I wouldn't sell it, spin it, or wrap it in a bow. I'd read it once, answer questions, and leave the room. Adults can choose. I will not be bullied into sharing, and I will not bully anyone into paying for a picnic. That middle road offends purists on both sides, which usually means it's sane. Before you label me soft, remember the order of operations. The chain came off, the invoices died. The vote went the way the law says it should go, and the keys left the wrong hand. That sequence matters to me because it proves I didn't negotiate from fear. I held the line, and then I chose what kind of neighbor I wanted to be, not because anyone forced me, but because I sleep better, knowing I didn't let one person's hunger turn me into concrete. So that's the story, as clean as I can tell it. It starts with a padlock and ends with a sound I'll never forget. Keys landing in a treasurer's palm, while a room full of people realizes equity without law is just a prettier word for taking. And somewhere in the middle, a town learned it can push back without screaming. That paperwork can be louder than anger, that a calm voice into a cheap microphone can turn a tide. Now it's your turn. Drop your city and your local time. So I know where you're listening from. Tell me if exclusive rights should stay exclusive. No matter what, or if there's a version of sharing that doesn't smell like extortion. Tell me if you'd lock that gate forever and sleep great, or if you'd write tight rules. You control and give a few good people a path that doesn't cost your soul. And if you've ever had a Lorraine in your life, a smiling voice that moved the goalposts and called it fairness, tell me what it took to make her let go.